You are a cultural pioneer, or as I'd like to say, a culture-neer. You're daring to go where others aren't willing to go. The unknown doesn't scare you, it intrigues you. You're not satisfied with the status quo. Business as usual is not in your DNA. You're done with doing the same thing and expecting a different result. You're an explorer at heart and a trendsetter by nature. You were born with purpose, called to lead, destined to make a difference. You are a culture-neer. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Culture-neer podcast. I'm your host, Terry Gwaltney, and today I'm excited about, I really just want to spend the next 20 minutes, and I want to talk about signs of a toxic culture. We talk all the time about how valuable it is to have a healthy culture, a remarkable culture, how it gives us a competitive advantage. But what are those signs? We don't talk about this much. What are those signs maybe that our culture is not as healthy as we want it to be? Maybe even to the point where it's toxic, not working for us, but actually working against us. So we're going to spend just a few minutes together today talking about that. I ran across a video I thought was really interesting. And this video was out of Washington State, and it was a sheriff's office that had received a 911 call. And the woman is saying she was forced to leave her home because of a pack of angry raccoons. So not your typical 911 call. What happened is, what we found out is when the sheriff's department showed up at her house, literally there was 100 raccoons in her yard. And what had happened is 35 years ago, this woman had started leaving food out for raccoons, thought it was a good idea in her yard. And there'd be a few more raccoons come over the next, 3.5 decades, but, wasn't a big deal. But suddenly over a 30-day period, I guess the word got out, and raccoons were coming from everywhere. And they would surround her when she tried to leave her house to go to her car. They were attacking her car, scratching it. I mean, it got out of hand where she didn't know what to do with it. So she literally had to call the police. Now, here's what's crazy about this. To have these removed, she's in Washington State, and to be able to have these removed when she contacted a company, it was going to cost her $500 per raccoon to have these raccoons relocated. Now, here's the sad thing about this entire story is obviously she didn't see the end result of her actions, but the problem and the nuisance she had was of her own making. She created the problem. Now, I want us to talk today, and I want to draw the parallel between toxic cultures and what creates them. So whether you're a business leader, a church leader, nonprofit leader, it really doesn't matter. We're going to talk about the things that cause a toxic culture, as well as some of the things that can help, fix that culture. So the very first thing when we're talking about this, I think it's important for us to remember, and we say this a lot, but your culture today is a result of either what you've created or it's a direct result of what you've allowed. Again, parallel back to this story. This poor lady created the mess that she had by starting to feed these wild animals. And they eventually become dependent on her as a food source. And over time, it just continued to become, magnified. And because she continued to do it, the problem continued to grow, and she allowed them to stay. And more came, and suddenly it was out of her control. Not where she intended to end up, much like some of our culture. We're nursing along. Maybe it's one person that's got a bad attitude, but they perform well. So we tolerate them. They're negative about everything in every meeting. They're finding 5 reasons why, the next thing we're trying to accomplish will never work. They drag people down when they open their mouth. It's never anything positive, but, some people maybe really like the guy, or he has an attribute that, it adds a little bit of value in one area, but he's sucking the life out of everybody in your team on the other. It's very similar parallels. So these toxic cultures that we're talking about, very first thing, guys, is they start with who you hire. So every person you bring into your organization impacts or influences or potentially changes your culture either good or bad. In other words, every person that you select to be on your team either adds to or they take away from your culture. So super important. If you're not looking at the addition of team members, employees into your organization, your company, your nonprofit through that lens, not only do they have a skill set that you need for a task that you need performed, but you're equally looking as how do they align with your mission, your vision, and your core values? How do they fit with your culture? Because it can't be either or. If you're really trying to build something that's going to have long-term sustainability and success, then you have to make sure that they're not only a competency fit, but they're a great cultural fit. Because culture never stays static. Even if you're not intentionally trying to create culture in your organization, great culture, or obviously nobody's trying to create a toxic culture, by default, the people that work for you will begin to create a culture. It's just a matter, and the question is it the one that you're looking for? Is it the one that you're benefiting from? Is it the one that's enhancing, the organization that you're trying to build? Or now, have you created an environment and a culture that's actually being counterproductive to your goals and what you're trying to create? So you hire the wrong person, and your talent acquisition, you end up with a toxic culture. And guys, it's a make. So you need to prioritize character and an alignment with your values as equally, if not more important than just the skill set. Because I promise you, one toxic hire can have a chain reaction in your organization. It's just like you're feeding one raccoon. Eventually, this raccoon attracted 100. So think about that for a minute. Second thing, let's talk about accommodating toxic people. So this poor lady, she had this problem of excessive raccoons that had begun 3 decades ago with feeding one single animal. You just think about when you hire one bad hire and you know it. You probably didn't know it when you first hired. There may have been warning signs, of some of his history and, some of the questions he answered you wondered about. Maybe he seemed to be a little bit overly negative, but you just thought you could pull him out of that. You could grow him beyond that. And really, you've seen something probably more valuable than the risks that you were taking, so you rolled the dice and hoped it just worked out. Sometimes, guys, toxic people just have to be removed from the organization rather than accommodated. There just comes a point where you can't coach people up, and the fact that they're bringing more harm than they are good to the rest of the team really necessitates that they need to be promoted to a customer. And the quicker you can do that, the better off you are. Part of the theory is you hire super slow and you fire very, very quickly. Why? Because if you get to the point where you've done everything to try to help a person succeed and they're not willing to put the time in to do it, then they're influencing in a negative way, most likely, other people that are around you. And it's actually you're hiring someone to work against what you're trying to accomplish. So you can't accommodate negative behavior. You need to address it immediately. It doesn't mean you fire people immediately with the first offense. It means that you jump in there from a coaching standpoint, like, hey, I'm not really sure how this worked where you came from, but we don't operate that way here. That type of behavior, that's not acceptable here. We want to foster an environment where we're looking at the glass half full, not half empty all the time. In other words, you speak directly into that situation immediately, and you try to coach that person and get them the resources, and then you encourage that. And if over time that doesn't change, then yes, you're going to have to make a move, and you're going to have to remove that person. Because if they're allowed to stay and thrive, the problem is they tend to attract other people with similar traits. It's like misery. You've heard the old saying, misery loves company. It's kind of the same way. It's funny how one negative person tends to migrate towards another negative person. One person that wants to gossip all the time runs in a circle with people that want to gossip all the time. And so you need to make sure that you're holding everybody accountable. Toxic people just attract other toxic people. The raccoon went from 1 to 100. Why? Because they have a way of multiplying. The raccoons in the story seen the woman as the food source. So they thought it'd be a great idea to invite their friends. So So you need to be working to kind of cultivate this positive work environment, creating conditions where all these healthy behaviors are recognized and rewarded. Remember, what you recognize is what gets repeated. What you reward is what gets repeated. What you allow is what you're teaching. So when you celebrate integrity, when you celebrate teamwork, when you celebrate innovation and respect, those starve out all those other behaviors that tend to feed into, a toxic culture. Over a period of time, if you don't deal with this, it's not just, I'm going to look the other way and I hope this gets better. Guys, hope is not a strategy. You need to have a plan. You need to execute on that plan. Toxic people will eventually take over your culture. I wrote about in the book, in the Culture-neer, the example of having a potato bin with a 10-pound bag of potatoes in there. And if you've ever stored potatoes in that type of way, what happens is over a period of time, potatoes left in the dark will actually keep for a very long time. Over a period of time, though, a potato can actually rot. And every potato that touches that other rotted potato will instantly begin to rot as well. And that is the importance of making sure that you're dealing with the situation and with people and with bad habits, because over time, it actually can take over your culture. Like the potatoes, it will ruin all the potatoes that are in the bin, and you'll have to kind of start all over. If you let it go for too long, you may have to start all over with an entirely different team, an entirely different department, a whole new staff, because sometimes you just can't turn it around fast enough if you've let it go for far too long. It's almost like you get to the point where you need to make the 911 call. It's because you've tried everything, and the raccoons are taking over. And so don't let it get to the point of a crisis before you make a decision to bring about some kind of change. The other thing to keep in mind is, if you get people that get to a point of they're being toxic in your culture, sometimes they can be aggressive. These raccoons, they weren't aggressive initially, but when they grew in number and they grew in influence, now they're surrounding this poor woman when she's trying to get into her house and just get to her car. Think about that. Toxic people in your organization can gain influence because, again, if they influence one person and then suddenly you're starting to see groups within your organization, that can become really, really dangerous. Guys, this is all a byproduct of you see a problem that's going on and you just don't want to confront it. And that's why, you're the leader. Sometimes you have to have awkward conversations, uncomfortable conversations. What you've tried to build, the other people that have agreed to come on your team and take this journey with you, they're important enough for you to step up and lean into these problems and take care of them. Matter of fact, they're expecting you to. And most of the time when we put these things off too long, everybody else knew that person needed to go. They may not have said it yet. Probably for sure didn't say it to you, but when they're gone, they knew. Sometimes we even undermine our own credibility and our leadership because we put those things off too long. And sometimes the reason we put them off is not so much about how they make that person feel, but it's the awkwardness of how it makes us feel. We don't want people talking about us. We don't like the feeling that, that we feel when we're having to, come down on somebody. Guys, this is just a part of leadership, and it's an area that you're just going to have to grow in. And you may reach a point where you need to reach out. You're going to need help maybe with your culture. In this particular case, she had to call 911 and get the sheriff's department involved, and then in turn had to turn around and get a nuisance animal removal company to come out and help her, because even though she created the problem, it was bigger than what she could handle. It had just got out of hand. You may be at a place like you're throwing your hands up and I can't fire every single person. I really think I just got one or two bad apples that I need to deal with, but I'm not really sure how to turn the ship with everybody else because I've let this problem go on for so long. You need to reach out maybe outside of your organization. Maybe you need to get a coach. You need to get someone else to come in with a perspective outside to be able to analyze the situation. Some assessments maybe need to be conducted, that are anonymous so you can really get a pulse on where your organization's at. You spent too much time, too much money, and too much energy on building this organization for you just to give up on it. But you may have to reach out and get some professional help to try to help you navigate that. Remember what John Maxwell said. He says, everything rises and falls on leadership. Sometimes it may require just getting a new leader in a particular department because they can't get a handle on it. They've allowed it to happen. So depending on how big your organization is, that leader closest to that may be part of the problem too. One, they either didn't recognize it and it's went on for so long, that's a problem, or they did recognize it and they just allowed it to stay and they've allowed it to grow to get to the point where it's at. Either one is a leadership problem. And you may have to step in and actually replace leadership. Finally, what I would say today is, guys, we need to regularly evaluate our culture. Just because it was great today, just because it was great 3 months ago, there's always something changing. There's a new decision made that somebody didn't understand. There was a stance that had to be made within the company that everybody didn't like. Maybe we didn't communicate as well this time as we've done, in the past. Whatever the case might be, maybe you just have to cut back. Maybe somebody had to be let go and the people closest to it understood it, but the majority of the people didn't, and it seemed like it was an unfair decision. You have to constantly evaluate your culture. And then you need to listen for feedback. You need to monitor kind of the team dynamics and what's going on, and then be proactive in addressing whatever concerns that you're hearing before they escalate and they get out of control. Listen, this was kind of different today, but I think this was a vivid example that reminds us that in our organizations, toxic behaviors can multiply if we just allow them to go unchecked. Remember, your culture is either a product of what you've created intentionally or what you've allowed unintentionally. Either way, that's the culture that you're living with today. Remember, a thriving culture is built on trust, it's built on respect and accountability, not on unchecked behavior, because that only leads to a toxic environment. You need to take some swift action. You need to reinforce your core values. You need to talk again about what your mission is. Talk about the vision of where you're headed as an organization. That's the stuff that ensures that your organization remains in a place where people feel like they're supported, they're empowered, but they're also inspired to do their best work. Remember, your culture is only as healthy as the leader. I'll see you next time on the Culture-neer podcast. Terry Gwaltney from the Culture-neer podcast. Listen, I want to say thank you for listening to the podcast today. I also want to encourage you to help us get the message out to more people. If you could like, share, and review this content on wherever you consume it, if you go to YouTube or LinkedIn or just whatever your social media channels are, and you could even share it, that would be a big help to us here at the Culture-neer podcast. Also, if you'd like some more information, you can go to www.terrygwaltney.com, where we have updates. We also have more resources. We share articles there. And you also can find our new book there called The Culture-neer. Again, we want to thank you again for taking time just to listen to the podcast or view it on YouTube. It's our goal to spend 20 or 30 minutes each time we're together to help grow your culture to a point where your employees refuse to leave and your customers can't resist. This is Terry. We'll talk to you soon.